A very good morning to everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm super excited to kick things off at React Nexus 2025. And in my talk, I'm going to be talking about how to build better forms with React 19. And in this session, we are going to talk about how forms, a very vital part of practically any enterprise application, can be built in a performant and more scalable way while preserving a good user experience using these new features introduced in React 19. So over the next 25 minutes, I'm going to walk you through what are these new features in React 19 and share some code examples and practical patterns with you. So hopefully by the end of this talk, you will be more confident about your future roadmap to upgrade or build your enterprise forms application. Sorry, forms. So before we get into the serious stuff, let me first introduce myself. Again, my name is Nipuni Paaris, and I'm an associate at technical lead at WSO2 Asgardio team. Quick intro into what Asgardio is. It is your identity and access management platform. So we take care of user access management and identity management for you, so you don't have to worry about it in your application code. Okay, so I've been a software engineer for almost close to 7 years now. And over those 7 years, I've had my fair share of struggles with forms. By show of hands, can you guys please agree with me or disagree? Thank you for that. Okay, so because a full appreciation of the solutions provided by React 19 requires us to have a clear understanding of what are the problem they are trying to solve, right? So in any real world enterprise application, whether it's like an internal admin dashboard or like a e-commerce platform with multi-step complex payment workflows, you often see dozens of fields in forms, right? So some are conditionally rendered, some require like multi-step interdependent validations, and some even require to dynamically add or remove based on the user choices. So because of all these requirements, the implementation complexity sort of skyrockets, right? And the traditional approach to building forms in React, which is the source of control comes with the React state. And with every single input field, we are required to declare a piece of state and then write an on-change event handler to update that state and wire these together. So in forms with dozens of fields, this increase of state management logic adds more boilerplate code than required, right? And this complexity in like state management directly contributed to the performance degradation, because in a implementation where the React state is the main source of control, every keystroke in an input field triggers a state update, right? So which in turn causes like the part of the form or even the significant part of the component tree to re-render. And in large and complex forms, these frequent re-renders can sort of leads to sluggish or even unresponsive user experiences. And one other very significant challenge is the maintainability, because the scattered nature of form implementation create many hurdles for us when it comes to maintainability. Because the state declarations, the validation rules, error handling logics were often like scattered across many components or even files. So this lack of co-location made it very difficult for us to have an overall idea about the form's behavior at whole, right? And while we are struggling and while we are juggling all these performance issues, performance optimizations and state management and all that, implementing advanced UX patterns and accessibility sort of relegate to secondary concerns. So implementing like, implementing all these resolutions for the challenges we mentioned earlier requires a additional manual effort. So we as developers naturally sort of implement these UX patterns and all either halfway or overlook completely. So even with all these challenges before React 19 for years, while entirely possible, the form implementations dependent on two predominant concepts, controlled components and uncontrolled components. So control components are typically components where you use state as the single source of truth for the form's data. And the value of an input field in the form is explicitly bound to the state variable, and any change to that input triggers an on-change event handler that updates the declared state. So most of the prominent libraries like Formic and React Final Form are built on top of this concept called control components. But however, as we discussed in the earlier slides, this level of control comes at a cost of significant boilerplate and performance overhead, and also requires us to add manual effort to overcome the performance issues that comes with it. And uncontrolled components means the form data is handled directly by the DOM itself rather than the React state. And instead of managing the input values through every change, developers use a ref to obtain the direct reference to the DOM node. The value is then pulled from the node only when it's needed, typically during the form submission. So this concept is basically the foundation for the very popular form library. I think you all are familiar with it, the React hook form, and essentially known to be very performant because it completely avoids that re-rend on keystroke cycle we talked about earlier. And as you can see, React 19 also is listed as a proponent under control components. But this sort of signals at like a complete paradigm shift, I would say, because it aligns more with the performance benefit of letting the DOM control the input state. But however, React 19 simply does not adopt the control pattern as it is. So it sort of introduces a hybrid model, I would say. The new architecture, in the new architecture, input behaves in an uncontrolled manner for the maximum performance, of course, while providing a new set of hooks for the developers to have this controlled orchestration over the form's submission lifecycle. So let's see how React 19 did that. So in my opinion, so React 19 marked a significant evolution or a significant change in how we handle forms in React applications, right? So this new approach aims to sort of reduce the client-side complexity and make the server interaction more direct and intuitive for the developers. And let's take a look at what these new features are, right? So the centerpiece of React 19 is the introduction of this action API. So actions are basically functions, typically asynchronous, that can be passed directly through to your form elements action prop, right? So this is sort of a deliberate choice, I would say, by the React team, which aligns React more with the more closely with the native HTML form behavior and web standards, and moving away from that earlier client-side abstraction of the on-submit event handler. So this alignment eliminates the need for us to manually call that event prevent default in our submission handlers. And also when when a form uses an action, React intercepts this form submission and manages the entire life cycle automatically, so you don't have to worry about it. And secondly, it leverages the native form data API, and the action function we talked about automatically receive this forms data as a form data object, and this actually eliminate the need to manually construct the form data from the form state. So because this system is built on top of like standard HTML forms, now the native HTML5 validation attributes like required and pattern are available to you out of the box without extra configuration, which is a good thing, right? So an action can also like be two kinds. Either it can be a client action or a server action. So, I mean, if your form handling part is, entirely on the client side, you would typically use a client action. But if you are using a framework like Next.js, you can also declare server actions. And so, in order to make these things even more easier for you, React introduced this use action state hook, which sort of manages the entire life cycle of an action, its pending state, the form data that it receives, and the error handling part of things, all in one hook. And complementing the use action state hook is the use form status hook. So it is a very, very simple hook, particularly, very useful when you're building reusable components. So because this hook's primary purpose is to allow the components, the child components, to access the status of its parent form component or the form submission without requiring any props to pass down through the component tree. Prop drilling, anyone? So there's a very crucial one rule that you need to follow when using this hook. So the components that calls the use form status hook must be rendered as a child of the form element. So it will not work if it's called within the same component that renders the form, or in the form tag itself. It must be in a separate nested component. And the final hook in the React form arsenal is the use optimistic hook. So again, this is a very powerful but very simple hook, which is primarily focused on creating very highly responsive user experiences. So it allows, I think it's pretty much self-explanatory if you read the hook's name. It allows the developers to optimistically update the UIs with the expected outcome immediately without waiting for the server to confirm that the underlying asynchronous action is completed successfully or not. So having said that, let's take a closer look at these features. So again, as I mentioned, Actions API is typically your functions, right? So in the traditional flow, if you are to handle a form in the client side, what you typically do is, user submits the form, you handle the form execution or the on submit logic in the code. Browser executes the code, we make an API call, and we are happy. So you can utilize these actions function in that particular flow as well. And when we are calling a server side, if we are using the server side rendering approach in your forms, so you can again use a action function in your server side component, and typically you would call the server side function, server side action, and the React would handle the rest for you. So let's take a look at a very basic example here. So you can see there's a form with one single field. So typically in the controlled approach, what we do is, so okay, you have the on submit handler, which is handle submit, and when the user clicks on submit, we would have a separate state variable to handle the state, the pending state, and we set it to true, and then we call maybe a API function or like the backend to pass the form data, and then we set the pending state to false, and then set the data returned from the API response, right? So this is quite a lot of boilerplate code. So before we see how use action state sort of eliminates the need for all these boilerplate code, let's go through the declaration or the syntax of the use action state hook, right? So typically the first okay. The first is the parameter, which is a function to be called when the form is submitted. So when the function is called, it would receive the previous state of the form as the initial argument, followed by the arguments that a form action would normally receive. And secondly, the initial state param is the value you want the state to be initial. It can be any serializable value, and this argument would get ignored after the action is invoked the first time. And you have this optional parameter called permalink. So it is basically a string containing a URL to a unique page that this form modifies. So I mean, if you use this in conjunction with progressive enhancement, basically if your form submission happens before the JavaScript loads in the browser, the browser will automatically navigate to that specified permalink rather than the current page's URL. So this ensures that the same form component is rendered on that destination page. And the use action state hook would return the current state. During the first render, it will match the initial state you provided, and after the action is invoked, it will match the value returned from the action. And a new action, the second value that is returned from the hook is the form action, which is a new action that you can pass the action prop in your form component, and this action can also be manually called in a transition as well. And lastly, the is pending flag. So I think it is, again, you can understand what it does when you look at it. It basically tells you whether there's a pending transition underneath or not. So if you go back to the earlier code example, so now using the React 19's use action state hook, you can get rid of all these boilerplate code and instead use use action state hook to specify the pending state and handle the form data in a way that is required in your implementation. So it reduces a lot of boilerplate code in your form implementation. So having said that, let's look further more closer to it. I mean, don't misunderstand, this is not an interpretation of how I feel about this. Okay, so let's take a closer look, because you guys remember transitions were introduced in React 18, and with React 19 they provided the capability to pass asynchronous function into these transitions. So that seamless state management provided by the use action state you saw is powered by React transition under the hood. So using use action state, developers could achieve like similar non-blocking UI updates. I mean, don't get me wrong, you can with React 19 you can do this instead of using the use action state hook as well. This works perfectly fine, but use action state hook is like a specialized and more high level abstraction built on top of use transition. So it automatically sort of wraps the actions execution with a transition and manage the pending states and all that for you without you having to handle it by yourself. Yeah. So the next hook is the use form status hook. So as I mentioned earlier, this is pretty much straightforward. So it returns four main values. So one is the Boolean, if it's true, which basically means the parent form component is pending submission. Otherwise, it would be false. And the second is the data, which is an object basically implementing the form data interface that contains the data of the parent form component that is submitting. And if there's no active submission or no parent form, obviously the value of it will be null. And second is the method. So it is like a string value of either get or post. So this represents whether the parent form is submitting with either a get or a post method. So by default, forms will use get, but you can specify otherwise. And action is a reference to a function that passes the action proper the parent form component. If there's no parent form, again, the property would return null. So let's again take a look at a very basic example and see this hook in action. So as I mentioned in my previous slide, so this use form status hook come in real handy if you are implementing like your own like custom components for the field, right? So as you can see, the username field here is a custom field I have implemented in order for me to use it in my form. So use form status hook. Let me use the pending state of the parent form component without me having to pass it down through the props down the component tree. So that's, I think, pretty much clear. And the next hook I wanted to cover is the use optimistic hook. And it lets you show a different state while an asynchronous action is going on. So it if we take a look at the the declaration, so what it result in is the optimistic state, and this state would be equivalent to the initial state unless action is pending. And add optimistic is the dispatching function to call when you have an optimistic update. So if it takes like one argument, the optimistic value of any type, and we'll call the update function with the state and optimistic value. So state is the value to be returned initially and whenever no action is pending. And lastly, the update function is a function that takes the current state and the optimistic value and return a resulting optimistic, like a combined value for you. Let's see how we would typically use this in a scenario. So imagine a chat app like this. So if the user types a reply to this and sends, this should appear something like this, right? So even though the the reply is not yet being sent, we need to optimistically show what the response was, and we need to show the pending state, right? So how we can do this with use optimistic hook is, so you have your initial form declaration, and in the action you send the initial state of the message, and then it would return the optimistic value for you to utilize in your code. So, having said that, let me quickly cover some advanced patterns you can use with React 19. So, with all these fundamental understandings, like a very frequent question is how to handle the validation. So, answer is a hybrid validation strategy. So, you have your client side, like the schema declaration with like a library like sort or something like that, and you have your client side validation, and then maybe you can use a library like React hook form to manage the form's interactive state and ensure that on the server side you have action which further validates your form data. And the second thing is, whenever you have like a multi-step workflow, you can utilize a wizard, and you can have like a one parent component which users use action state and have the state managed in a very centralized way and cleanly, and in a more maintainable way. You can isolate the logic. And again, so sometimes we need to render dynamic fields. So the way to go is to go with like a array indexing for the fields, so that you will have like a uniquely identifiable identifier for the each field, and then when you need to make changes, it's just a matter of manipulating that array of fields. And lastly, of course, a resilient application must always distinguish between expected validation errors and unexpected runtime errors. So a server action might not fail, but a DB can, of course, go offline. So always have a error boundary in place so that your application would gracefully handle these situations better. And so, having said that, we have come to the end of my talk. And as we reach the end, I'm going to leave you with this. So, React 19 is more than just a collection of hooks and APIs. So, it's represent a more mature and integrated and a more powerful vision for what React could be as a framework. Seamlessly bridges this client side and server side. So, by understanding these new tools, hopefully after this talk, you can utilize these tools to better build better and faster forms in your applications. Thank you.